Planning Advisory Committee. My apologies, I'll do it again. Call this meeting to order. Trevor Cunningham, I'm the chair of the PAC, Planning Advisory Committee, and it's June 29th, 2022. And we're going to be here tonight. The principal item of business is the Oceans Group of the Bedford Institute of Oceanography. They're going to be giving a presentation with regard to the Chebogue area. But I'd like to move on to item 2, land acknowledgement. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands of the Acadia First Nation, part of Mi'kmaq, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And just before we begin the presentation, perhaps I'll go around so everybody can familiarize one another with everybody. So Kim, I'll have you start. You're in the upper left-hand corner of my screen, so perhaps you can introduce yourself, and we'll move around the virtual table that way.
I'm Kim Rowley. I'm the admin assistant here for Development and Public Works.
Right, Trevor Cunningham, and I've already introduced myself as PAC chair, but I'm also the deputy warden of the municipality district of Yarmouth. Councillor Cushing.
Yes, Lauren Cushion, councillor for District 6 for the municipality of Yarmouth.
Mr. Devine.
Hi, I'm Roger Devine, the Director of Development and Inspection for the municipality.
Councillor Durkee. Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
Oops, I'm muted. Patty Durkee, Councillor and Vice Chair of PAC.
Mr. King.
I am Marty King. I'm with the Marine Planning and Conservation Group with DFO and DFO Maritimes region, based out of the Bedford Institute of Oceanography in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia.
Okay, Mr. Kamal.
Hi, I'm Warner Kamal. I'm a citizen rep of the Planning Advisory Committee.
Mr. Robertson.
My name is Derek Robertson. I work as planning staff with the municipality of the District of Yarmouth.
Yeah, and Mr. Herbert.
Good evening. I'm Glenn Herbert. I'm the regional manager for the Marine Planning and Conservation Group. Work with Marty, Fisheries and Oceans.
My apologies on the pronunciation.
It's okay.
Sale Brooks.
Hi, my name is Victoria Brooks. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer with the District of Yarmouth, and thank you for taking the time to chat with us tonight.
Mr. Surratt.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Surratt. I'm the Area Chief of Resource for Southwest Nova for DFO. And I'm here, like you guys, to listen in. I do live on the Chebogue River, so I'm very interested in the presentation and trying to provide some input for DFO.
Okay, thanks very much. Ms. Simpson.
Hi, I'm Patty Simpson. I'm a citizen representative on the Planning Advisory Committee and looking forward to the presentation. Thank you.
And Mr. Malik.
Hi, everyone. I am a Director of Municipal Services at Moody.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And we'll move on to item number 3. And I'd like to, before you present, thank all the presenters for coming online and providing us with the presentation. It's a really important issue for the municipality. Obviously, we're living in a municipality that abuts a vast marine area, and the Chebogue area is one of those places, and it's very, very important to us, obviously. So without further ado, the presentations from the Oceans Group, Bedford Institute of Oceanography, on the proposed Marine Protection Act in Chebogue. So I'll turn things over to the presenters.
Great, thank you very much. And Marty will be doing the main presenting. I guess we'll be sharing the screen, but maybe just a little bit of context. Thanks very much for inviting us, and we're pleased to be here. And just a little bit more about our group. Well, before we get into the topic for tonight, Oceans Management Group, or now Marine Planning and Conservation. We are responsible for a number of programs that cover DFO Maritimes region, which is essentially the waters of the Bay of Fundy, through the Gulf of Maine and Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia up to the tip of Cape Breton. And then we abut with the Gulf region for DFO and the Newfoundland Labrador region there, and they have similar programming. A major focus of our work is on marine conservation planning, and we have a number of existing marine conservation areas throughout the region, and Marty will be showing some of those in his presentation. And also we are actively doing planning for the future, and that's going to be the main focus. And this is where your area comes into play in terms of the future planning that we're doing. We're also involved in things called marine spatial planning, where we get involved in multiple use management and other issues beyond marine conservation. And we have a program called Marine Environmental Quality, which is focused on things like ocean noise and marine contaminants. So we have a broad range of responsibilities. We're going to be focusing on the marine conservation here, but I just wanted to set a bit of context. And we are all based primarily at the Bedford Institute of Oceanography, but we do work actively across the region. And maybe I'll just go to Dwayne because he could maybe speak to the Southwest Nova Scotia area office and sort of its roles, responsibilities, and we can go to Marty for the presentation.
Thanks, Glenn. I started to mention it on the introductions, but at the area office, we support the MPA group with any of the active files they have that are in our area in Southwest Nova. So many of these files are of great interest to you folks and to me as well, living in the area. So I give the area flavor to the folks at BIO. So that's basically my role. This one a little bit more interesting for me. I live on the Chebogue River, so I think it's a very very good initiative. I would like to see, this area. I live in the area, and I'd like to see it preserved the way it is. It's a lot of unique habitat in the area, so I want to see it done the right way as well. So that's why I'm here tonight. So thanks.
Thanks, Dwayne. So Marty, are you set? And I think I'll just, as he's open up, I think we'll be providing a bit of a regional context that will situate Chebogue area in a broader context, but there's definitely going to be lots of time and focus on Chebogue as well. So, okay, I can see your screen. It's not in presentation mode yet, but
I'll put it in presentation mode here.
And question for the chair: how do you prefer? Do you take questions throughout, or do you allow the presentation to go through and then come back later, or we're happy with it, whatever your practice is?
I think it's probably better to have you do the presentation, in its entirety and then ask questions later. That's what the agenda has sort of laid out. So we'll go with that. But if somebody has, something that's really pressing, I mean, we don't need to be that formal about it either. If it's fine by you, then it's fine by me as well. So all that to say is generally I'd like to see perhaps have you go through the entirety of the presentation, but if somebody has a burning question, certainly I'd be willing to have you entertain that.
Yeah, that makes sense, Trevor. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So the subject here is conservation network planning in the Scotian Shelf Bay of Fundy bioregion, which is really the regional context of some of the planning work that Glenn referred to. And of course, Chebogue is one of many sites that have been identified throughout the Scotian Shelf Bay of Fundy bioregion as, an area that we think would make a good conservation area because of its high ecological value. But we also look at, things like, are there cultural values in the area that are also very kind of compatible with conservation, and we look at potential socioeconomic impacts. And one of the real key criteria, I mean, obviously with a protected area or a conservation area, first and foremost, it's about conserving the ecosystems and the biodiversity of those areas. But we also put a very large amount of emphasis on minimizing any kind of negative socioeconomic impacts. So, like I said, this is a long-term regional scale planning process. I personally have been working on this project for over a decade, and I'll walk through some of that work really quickly. We're finally at the point now where we do have this draft map of proposed future conservation areas. And there's 34 potential proposed new areas, and Chebogue is one of those areas. So I don't really have a whole lot, I spend a whole lot of time explaining the Chebogue area. I do have a couple slides on it at the end. But a lot of this is background and context for you just to understand the bigger picture at the national scale and even the regional scale before we zero into this individual site. So really appreciate the opportunity. I guess maybe a couple more points before I start. Just, I think these are really important things to clarify. The first one is, even though this project's been ongoing for 10 years, a lot of it has been background data compilation and you know, consulting with other levels of government, consulting with, you know, the fishing sector. You know, Dwayne's probably sick of seeing me down in Southwest Nova because I'm always down talking to the lobster advisory committees, and I had a meeting with the Brazil Rock. I presented to the AGM of Brazil Rock Lobster Association just last week, actually in Shelburne. It was nice to do an in-person meeting for a change. So we've been out talking about this for a long time, mostly to stakeholders and less to the public. But we are now kind of at the point now where we have this draft map. We are looking to move into more kind of open, transparent public consultation around some of these areas. So this is really good timing, even though we're a little bit ahead of the game because our official kind of public consultation period is scheduled right now to start next spring or summer. So first point, we're still very, very early in the process. And like I said before, these are areas of high ecological value that we think could make good protected areas, but still lots of consultation ahead. The second point is protected areas, especially coastal protected areas, marine protected areas, in almost all cases, they don't restrict a lot of the current traditional sustainable activities that are taking place in an area. You know, things like lobster fishing, things like clamming, other types of recreational activities, sustainable tourism type activities. So they're not areas that are just off limits, and you know, typically they're going to be areas that are managed for, you know, sustainability. They're managed for the health of the ecosystem. They're managed for you know, the protection of biodiversity. That's really what this is about. They're really about balance, I think, is a good word to use there. What they do protect from is you know, future more heavy industrial development type initiatives that could have that kind of long-term impact on habitat and on biodiversity. So typically lobster and other sustainable fisheries, for example, are going to be compatible with a coastal marine protected area. So I just wanted to get that out on the table up front, and then, you know, we'll probably come back to some of those questions at the end of the presentation. But now I'll go through the actual presentation. Sorry, I need to minimize my screens here so I'm not blocking the slides. But in terms of an outline, I'll start by just providing some background information on Canada's conservation network and our Marine Conservation Targets Initiative, which is something that some of you may have heard of. And then I'll get into the regional work, this regional planning work that we're doing for conservation. And that's, of course, where Chebogue comes in, because it's one of those proposed sites that make up this proposed network plan. And then I do have just one slide on lobster fishing and MPAs. I had that for the Brazil Rock presentation. So I just thought I'd keep it in there because, you know, Yarmouth is really, you know, the center of the lobster universe. So I thought you might be interested in that as well. So background information. First of all, what is a conservation network? It's kind of an obscure term, really, when you think about it, but really what we're talking about is a conservation area network, or a network of conservation areas within a specific region. So really, and this is actually, there's a very technical definition that is used internationally, but I'd like to just spell it out in a little simpler terms. So this is my version of the definition. And it's really a collection of spatial conservation measures. They could be formal marine protected areas, or they could be these other types of conservation measures. We call them other effective conservation measures, OECMs. But really a spatial conservation measure that has a range of protection levels. You know, some of the areas may be strictly protected and may be off limits to extractive use. Other ones may be multiple use areas. Like I mentioned, a lot of the coastal sites are, you know, areas where sustainable traditional activities continue and kind of are, you know, existing in harmony as they always have with biodiversity and the overall health of the ecosystem. But the key factor for a network is that they're designed in a very systematic way. So they're connected, they complement each other. So you might have, you know, a spawning area for a species is protected in one area, and a nursery area for that same species is protected in another area. So, you know, even though they're separate areas, you know, you might have you know, the spawning occurring in one area and then the settlement and the juveniles occurring in another area. So those two sites are really complementing one another. So, and those types of connections are through things like species migration or dispersal of eggs and larvae. So that's just a, you know, I like this definition for a conservation network. Really important point is this is Canada's conservation network that we're working toward. And under the Oceans Act, that we have two kind of responsibilities when it comes to marine protected areas. First of all, we can establish marine protected areas under the Oceans Act, and we have a few of those already in this region, and we're working on a couple of more right now. And these Oceans Act marine protected areas will make up a good chunk of our network within our region. But Section 35(2) of the Act states that the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans shall lead the development and implementation of a national network of marine protected areas on behalf of the government of Canada. So DFO is leading this. So people like me, people like Glenn, we're out doing this work, but we're doing it on behalf of the entire government. It's not just a DFO initiative. And our two biggest kind of federal partners in this exercise are the Canadian Wildlife Service and Parks Canada. And the reason there is that they can also establish protected areas in the ocean. Each of them have different types of legislation. I could explain those if anybody's interested, but you know, Parks Canada, the Canadian Wildlife Service, they all have their own legislation to create these protected areas in the ocean. And they have different names, but they're essentially for the same purposes: conserving biodiversity, protecting threatened species, that sort of thing. Now, ideally, and we really hope that we're going to get there someday, that this just isn't a federal initiative. It's something that the provinces are involved in and partnering with us on it. First Nations are involved in and partnering with us on it. And I would even go as far to say municipalities in some cases, that third level of government, you know, could even be involved, like, you know, could obviously be involved, but, you know, could play a key role in implementing this national network. You know, so, you know, Chebogue might be a good example. It was something that the municipality of Yarmouth, you know, supported and, you know, played a role in you know, seeing the process play out. Then that would be a great example of that. So it's not just a federal initiative. Ideally, it's kind of an all of Canada initiative. So protection standards. Now, we always get questions around, okay, what are the restrictions? What are the rules going to be in these protected areas? And every site is unique, and we kind of have to go through a process to arrive at what the ultimate set of rules are for each site. But because of that, because of the, I guess, the confusion that was created around all these various types of federal protected areas, the Government of Canada came up with, in April of 2019, they came up with these protection standards to provide some clarity and provide some consistency across protected areas. So from that point forward, any new federal marine protected area, so this could be an Oceans Act marine protected area, which would be DFO led, it could be a Parks Canada site, it could be a Canadian Wildlife Service site, doesn't matter. All of those federal designations, they all at a minimum have this, are are going to prohibit any kind of oil and gas activities, any kind of mining, any kind of dumping, and any kind of mobile bottom gear fishing, right? So that's kind of the minimum level of protection. Any other activity that may be proposed in an area would have to go through a site-specific assessment to determine whether or not that activity would be allowed to occur within a marine protected area. So a few more things about Canada's conservation network. Back in 2011, we, the federal agencies that I mentioned, DFO, Parks, and CWS, we worked with all of the provinces and territories and came up with this national framework for Canada's network of marine protected areas, or network of conservation areas, essentially. And within that, we identified 3 goals, which I like, because it really hammers home the point that, this isn't just about nature conservation. It is about it's about supporting sustainable resource use. It's about supporting cultural values and preserving cultural values and educating Canadians and others on, the cultural values of our country. So I've highlighted goal 1, which is the biodiversity component. So it's to provide that long-term protection for marine biodiversity, ecosystem function, and special natural features. That is the primary goal of this national network. But we also want to support sustainable resource use and the socioeconomic values and ecosystem services they provide. We also want to enhance public awareness and appreciation of Canada's marine environments and rich maritime history and culture. So it's not just about nature, it's about balancing that with cultural values, with socioeconomic values. I think that's a really important message. This isn't, I'm providing more background than I typically do in this presentation, just because I know that, maybe some of you haven't, been exposed to this material so far. So continuing on with some of the background, another really important development happened in 2019, in addition to the protection standards, but the mandate letter for the minister basically stated that we were going to introduce an ambitious plan to conserve 25% of our oceans by 2025, and then working towards 30% by 2030. So that's a very ambitious plan. At the time, we were at about 14%, and that's kind of where we are now, where we currently are. But the mandate letter also stated that the plan should be grounded in science, Indigenous knowledge, and local perspectives, and that we would be advocating for this type of goal to be set internationally. So it's a very strong statement made by the Liberal government. And if we go back even further, for the previous mandate letter, there was a very strong statement about meeting our initial target, which was to protect 10% by 2020. I don't have a slide on that now, but that's something that we did exceed. So I think the next slide shows, this is the national map of the protected areas, the marine protected areas, and what we call these other effective conservation measures. So an example of an other effective conservation measure would be a spatial fisheries closure, like something like, there's an area in the middle of the Scotian Shelf that used to be known as the haddock box. And it was a closure, a fisheries closure that was put in place in 1987 to protect juvenile haddock. And when we started talking to the fishing industry about this initiative to meet the 10% by 2020, and that there'd be new targets coming, and we're trying to build this national network, immediately industry said, well, we need to get credit for some of the things that we've already done, because what we've done is created these de facto marine protected areas, with some of these fisheries closures that were put in place. And this was an industry proposed measure that was put in place in 1987. So it's essentially been closed to fishing for a very long time. So areas like that, we kind of evaluated each of them on an individual basis, a site-by-site basis, and decision was made that they could contribute to these targets. So like I said, we're now at 14.66%, but we're working within the next 2 to 3 years. We want to be up to 25%, and then 30% by 2030. So, and the split there is a lot of it is made up through marine protected areas, but some of it is made up through these other types of closures. And that's maybe a bit too much detail for this presentation. So let's focus in on what we have in place in our region. So this is a map of our region. The red areas are Oceans Act marine protected areas. I mentioned that we have 3 in place already. There's St. Anne's Bank east of Cape Breton. There's the gully out here in the edge. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's just east of Sable Island. And then another small one in southwest New Brunswick, just west of St. John, called Musquash Estuary. So they come in various shapes and sizes. These blue areas, those are also DFO, what we call other effective conservation measures. And that haddock box area I was talking to is this big one in the middle of the Scotian Shelf. So that was one that was led by industry. We now got credit for that. It counted toward our national targets, which means, if we can count some of these existing areas, then it's less direct impact on industry. Some of the other sites, there's some small coastal sites led by Canadian Wildlife Service, and there's one portion of the Keji seaside adjunct contributes to the target as well, but these coastal sites are very, very small. So right now, if you add up everything that's in place within our region, we contribute 1.22% to that overall 14.66% nationally. We're a very small region, so what we do doesn't have a massive dent, but you can see already that we're starting to piece together this, some key areas within this network of protected areas. And this big one out here on the Eastern Canyons Marine Refuge here, the big one in the deep water off the shelf edge, that one was just designated a couple of Wednesdays ago, June 8th on Oceans Day. It was announced by the minister, and that actually almost tripled the amount of protection that we had in our region. So right now, regional protection, we're around 15% of regional waters. I know this is a lot of information, and we can come back to any of this if there's any questions. So in addition to all of these existing sites that are in place in our region, the areas outlined in purple, we're also working on 2 new Oceans Act marine protected areas, which we're hoping that we'd have in place by 2025. One of them might be okay to get there, the other one maybe not. But the 2 sites are, the one closest to you is Funny and Channel Browns Bank. So a lot of fishers in ports around Yarmouth, including Yarmouth, would fish in this area. So there's a very rigorous consultation process taking place to designate this site as an MPA under the Oceans Act. And then the other one is Eastern Shore Islands, which is a coastal site east of Halifax. It's quite large. And there's some similarities with Chebogue. It's much larger than Chebogue, the Chebogue site, but it does have an island archipelago. That's really the key feature there. It does have lobster fishing like everywhere else does along the coast of Nova Scotia. So it's an interesting site, really pristine area. There's not a lot of development, so it's a really good candidate for protection. So that was a lot of background information, a lot more than what I'm used to delivering in this presentation. A bit of a mouthful, but we can come back to questions on that later if there are any. So now to talk about the work that we're doing, that regional conservation planning work that we're doing. So how did we come up with the map that I'll show you here in a second? And like I said, I've been working on this for over 10 years. Others ahead of me have worked on it for even more years. So a lot of work has gone into this, and a lot of the work has gone into pulling together the information that we need to do an analysis that will help us identify areas that will have the highest ecological value and the most bang for our buck, while also balancing that socioeconomic impacts. So step 1 was just to gather information, and we gathered a lot of information, not just on the ecological side of things. So we looked at species distributions, habitat maps, literally hundreds of species. We have maps pulled together to consider in this process. Human use mapping, our marine spatial planning program that Glenn mentions, leading the human use mapping side of things. So we have very detailed fisheries maps, We have very detailed maps of other activities in the region. And then cultural information, I would say, would be a bit of a gap. It would be nice to know, where are culturally significant sites for the Mi'kmaq throughout all Nova Scotia, the coast of Nova Scotia. That would be a really nice piece to have. But other cultural values, there's obviously a rich, Acadian culture in Southwest Nova area. I think, Chebogue is a good example of a site that has those kind of cultural values. So really important to have that information as well. And we're always trying to update the information that we're bringing to the table. And we're hoping that the consultation period will help address some of those gaps. Second step is to set objectives. So what do we want to accomplish? And really that's breaking down that primary goal for the network, that high level goal about biodiversity, ecosystem function, special natural features. We tried to unpack that into which species do we really want to focus on? Which habitat types do we really want to focus on? So we did that. That's really what step 3 was, to kind of dig into the details there. Which species, which habitats, and then set targets for each of those. And then we did a very kind of technical analysis, I would say, especially for the offshore. The inshore versus the offshore was a little bit different because of the different type of information that was available. And we did a very rigorous analysis. There were multiple scientific peer review processes that all fed into it. And we came up with essentially the map that I'm going to show you on the next slide. So, we've done steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're just at the point now where we need to do, and we've consulted at each of those steps. But now we're at the point where we need to, consult more broadly and try to finalize the map. And then when we have the map finalized, that will be our plan moving forward. When we want to pick a new marine protected area, we'll look at the plan and say which one makes sense, right? And then we'll be doing that in consultation with various interests. So this is the map. This is the map of the big picture for the whole region. Again, it's still draft. Like I said, we'll be consulting. We just finished a targeted engagement period on March 31st, where we were seeking written feedback from other federal agencies, the provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, First Nations, Indigenous groups, and key stakeholders. So that was, one of the reasons I was presenting to the Brazil Rock AGM last week, was to talk to them about this stuff. And a key message for them was, lobster is not going to be restricted in these coastal sites, these coastal components of the network. So I can come back to that. So now moving forward, I've already referred to this. We just finished the targeted phase 1 of consultation. We're now going into kind of a revisions phase. In addition to considering the feedback that we received, we're also looking at any new scientific information that might be available. One thing that we're really interested in right now and our science team is working on is trying to build some climate change considerations into this process a bit more, and look at areas where, maybe areas that are going to be a bit more stable, where the conditions aren't going to change as much as others, and how do we factor that into what the next version of this map looks like. And then as I indicated before, next spring, next summer, we're going to go out and do that second phase of consultation. We'd like to do open houses in communities like Yarmouth and others. We'd like to do, there will be an interactive kind of web element to it, where you can provide your comments through a web portal. And then in addition to the more public outreach that we'll be doing, there'll be a lot of continued bilateral discussions with key partners and key stakeholders. And then at some point in 2024, we want to finalize the plan. And in some ways, it's always going to be open for revisions. When we have new information, we'd be foolish not to revise it. But by 2024, we want to have it to a point where we're confident, we've consulted well, it reflects the feedback that we received, and it's going to be our blueprint moving forward. So and having it done by 2024 is important because it's possible we're going to be asked to pick some new areas in 2025, right? So new areas for designation, right? So if Chebogue ends up on the plan in 2024, that doesn't mean that it's going to immediately go toward, it's going to be immediately be protected. We would then have to initiate a whole separate site-specific consultation process to actually designate the site. And it's an interesting area. I'll just go to Chebogue now. So this is just basically a zoomed in version of that previous map with the LFA boundaries on it. So LFA 33 is here. LFA 34 is the one obviously where Chebogue falls. And you can see all the other sites that make up the network design. The green sites are the proposed new ones. The blue sites are the ones that we're currently working on. The outlined in purple areas are the existing areas. So yeah, so that's just a zoomed in map. And then I think this is one of my last slides. But if we take a very close look at the Chebogue area, I would say that the two main reasons it was identified as high ecological value was really the first two bullets here. The diversity of habitat that you have here. You have, a very large percentage of this site is intertidal with salt marsh and eelgrass and rockweed. These are kind of provincially significant concentrations of these what we call biogenic habitats. So plant life that's providing habitat for other species. So there's the significant concentrations of salt marsh, eelgrass, and rockweed. That's a really key factor here. The diversity of habitats, with all the islands and the little sheltered bays and exposed beaches and rocky shoals and ledges, and it just provides a lot of different habitat for different species. And I don't think we really, the marine area hasn't really been studied super well in this area either. There's probably a lot more diversity there than we know of. Now, this area is also extremely important for a lot of different birds, and I'm not a bird person, so I don't know a lot about all these species, but we worked with the Canadian Wildlife Service, which is kind of the bird-focused agency, in identifying these areas. So foraging area for a lot of geese, ducks, cormorants, terns, those types of species. It's another foraging area for dabbling ducks, shorebirds, and the Atlantic brant. It's a stopover site for the piping plover, which is an endangered species. And then the last two bullets here, it's a nursery area for a number of different fish species and invertebrates, including lobster. So all that eelgrass, all that salt marsh, that provides habitat for a lot of juveniles for a lot of different species. So obviously super important to be protecting, immature fishes so they can grow and contribute to the fishery and the ecosystem. And then last but not least, certainly spawning area for Atlantic herring, which of course is another key commercial species, but also a very, very important species in the ecosystem. So I think 2 more slides. So lobster fishing and MPAs, I can go through this pretty quickly. I think you get the point. Lobster is very well managed with low ecological impact. So essentially, unless other than extremely rare circumstances, we don't expect there to be restrictions on lobster in these sites that are right up against the coast. And so the fact that there isn't a very large ecological impact of lobster fishing is one factor. The other factor is just the socioeconomic importance and the cultural importance of that fishery in particular to the coastal communities of Nova Scotia. And if you look at, and it's almost like when we talk to industry about this, they don't believe us. They're like, no, we don't really trust you, your government, and we just think that maybe the rules will change later on or something like that. So that's a real challenge for us in this process. I mean, who would want to shut down the lobster fishery? That's not an objective here. It's not what this is about. This is more about protecting the ecosystem so the lobster fishery can continue to thrive the way it is. And if you look at the 2 MPAs that we have in place that overlap, we have 3. One of them doesn't have lobster in it. It's the Gully, the big offshore one. But the 2 that do overlap with lobster habitat, Musquash Estuary and St. Anne's Bank, neither of those areas restrict lobster fishing in the area that lobster is fished. St. Anne's Bank has a different zone where there's no fishing allowed, but all of the traditional inshore fisheries are allowed in a special zone within that site. So all within their traditional fishing footprints, those fisheries are all allowed to continue. And that's kind of what I would envision for something like Chebogue if it were to go forward as a site. Another key thing with MPAs is there's a lot of opportunity for collaborative science. We get money to do annual monitoring and research in these areas. So, we try to work with industry, contract industry to go help us collect data, talk to industry about, what they're seeing on the water, what are they observing with climate change? Like there's things are happening so fast. A lot of fishermen, as you all probably know, are scientists, citizen scientists. They have questions, they're involved in the monitoring, they're involved in the management of the site. And really another key point here, if you're reading between the lines, is that an MPA can actually protect the fishery and other traditional uses from future threats, things that are unknown, whether it be expansion of a new industry coming in. And I know as a municipality, maybe that's something that you want to see happen, right? But having those, and we're not saying there shouldn't be any new development anywhere. We're just saying within these protected areas, let's make sure that we're protecting biodiversity, protecting the ecosystem, because the fisheries, other activities, they all depend on a healthy ecosystem. I think my last slide here. Hopefully everyone's hanging in there. So just some summary points. Canada's committed to 25% by 2025, and we're working toward 30 by 30. This government is very serious about this. I think they proved that by exceeding the target, the 10% by 2020 target. We're currently working on 2 priority sites in the Scotian Shelf bioregion, Fundy Channel Browns Bank and Eastern Shore Islands. For the network planning process, we recently concluded phase 1 of consultation. Phase 2 is planned for the spring, summer of 2023. That's where we'll be really getting out there publicly and just making this available to the public. And then, we're hoping to complete the conservation network plan in 2024. And any new sites will be selected from the final plan. So, that's the idea, is that we're taking the surprise factor out of things moving forward. So if you're an industry looking to develop somewhere in the Scotian Shelf, somewhere on the coast of Nova Scotia, knowing where the future protected areas are going to be, that's important information to have, right? That's just good planning. So right now it's kind of like people are just guessing where the next site is going to be. So having this plan really provides that certainty moving forward, which is good for new development. It's good for existing activities to know, which areas are on the table for protection and what type of, restrictions to expect in those areas. Last point, really important, lobster fishing and other traditional sustainable activities will almost always be compatible with coastal MPAs. That's where balancing the economic impacts with the conservation measures is crucial. And we just don't see any need to restrict fisheries like lobster, fixed gear, traditional, low impact, well-managed fisheries, because they really are the lifeblood of the communities. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. The presentation was fantastic, and I'll open the floor to questions. And okay, Councillor Cushing.
Well, thank you for the presentation, and unfortunately, I'm assuming that our chair will not allow me to ask all the questions I have. So I'll start.
Ask away. We've got lots of time.
Obviously, this MPA is a very important to me in my district. District 6, we have a large fishing group, and our vice chair for the PCA. She also is in a large fishing community also, and so they're very important. You say you made a presentation to the Brazil Lobster Rock Association. How did they receive your presentation?
No, I'm not on mute. Yeah, you probably would have been surprised. And the reason why it wasn't as rough as it has been in the past is that's the third time that I've met with that group. I met with the board of directors last year in Tuscany, and then a few years ago, I think 2017, we went down and presented to the board of directors again. That would have been the first time, because they're a relatively new association, as you probably know, and they're also, I think, the biggest association in all of our region. So really important that we have a good relationship with them. Dan Fleck is the new executive director. He's doing a very good job. And I'd say Michael Larkin's shown some really strong leadership. And I think they're kind of looking at this as, there were a couple questions that I would say indicated that, and we hear this a lot, that there's not a lot of trust for the federal government. It's almost like I almost got the feeling that this individual was thinking, well, this just sounds too good to be true, right? That we can, we could basically have, our lobster grounds protected and continue to be able to fish as we are right now. So, I think it's something that we're trying to work really hard with a lot of the association reps, and this goes beyond Brazil Rock, but we have a little bit of an informal working group where we're meeting with inshore fishing associations, and there's even a couple of mobile reps involved in this discussion. And what we're trying to do is just agree on what an effective MPA looks like, that where fishing continues and we're still meeting our conservation objectives, right? So what does a good MPA, what does a good coastal MPA in Nova Scotia look like? One that industry can live with, one that industry can actually thrive in, right? So that's kind of something we've been doing really. It's really been a couple of years now, I think, Glenn, that we've been having these discussions. It started over COVID because we weren't able to get together with the regular groups that we were getting together with. So we started something with the Eastern Fishermen's Federation, which is, all Eastern Canada. It's all the associations, all the fishing associations across Eastern Canada. But anyway, it's kind of zeroed in to just our region and a lot of key reps. And there's a few of them from the Yarmouth area that are involved in that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not finished yet. If I can ask another one. I like you talk about the conservation network, and when you're talking about species migration, I can't make up my own writing. And dispersal of eggs and larvae. Are you supportive of DFO creating dead migration rivers and streams for the Gasbro and kayaks? Is that something on your guys' radar?
That's not.
I understand right now. No, it isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work on that personally.
But you talk about conservation and species.
Yeah.
The kayak are very important species for the fishermen to use for bait for their lobster fishing. So I think it's, your words are saying one thing, and then you're not involved with an actual migration of a species of kayak, eels, and other fish that migrate from saltwater to freshwater, then back to saltwater. You're not interested in those migration paths leaving to die. And
yeah, I'd say what I presented today is it doesn't cover anything beyond anything higher than the low water mark. It's more, well, actually, that's not true. The intertidal areas are included in the network design. DFO,
Chabot River is a tidal work.
yeah, no, DFO Oceans Act MPAs can't go any further than the low water mark. There's other tools that can cover that intertidal zone. But my point is, you know, this initiative is focused on biodiversity conservation. So we're concerned about all species, regardless of their use or economic value. I think I know what you're getting at, but I don't want to like throw another part of the department under the bus, but so Glenn, feel free to jump in and stop me here, but I believe, you know, the fish passage issues would all be dealt with through our FFHPP group, which
I
is,
think,
I've
Go ahead,
talked to
Dwayne.
Dwayne quite several times about this, so.
Yeah.
He
yeah,
knows. where I'm
Dwayne's put
coming
his
from.
hand up, so maybe Dwayne wants to jump in here.
Yeah, I just
go
wanted
ahead,
to
Dwayne.
say to Lauren, it's a little bit of a different conversation with the Gasbro and the fish passage. As you're aware, on the Tuscan River, the big die-off that we had, or fish kill that we had there this year. It's unfortunate, but we do have another group working on fish passage with Nova Scotia Power. And unfortunately, the group here tonight with Oceans Protection, you know, MPAs, kind of sounds like it's the same group, but it is a different group. And I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, like Marty said, but we are working. It's a different set of people that are working with Nova Scotia Power and providing authorities and providing written authorities, yes, on what work they can and can't do around the rivers. So this year didn't go very well here. I've heard a lot about the Gasbro. I'm hoping, you know, there's a lot of work that's going to be done over the next months coming into next season that will allow more fish passage, especially on the Tuscan River, where we have some works underway, some projects to.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of other areas too that are being neglected, as you well aware.
I'm well aware, Lauren, and those are there's many specific areas, you know, site-specific areas that we try to work on, and unfortunately, we can't get to them all. So, I just wanted to say that on the Chabot River here, with the MPAs, if you look, you know, it only goes up to probably where the Gasbro fishing starts. So where there may be some issues with passage after that. So not really to protect one species, but it's an overall protection of the area.
Yeah, I certainly have a lot more questions to ask, but I see Patty got her hand up, so I'll sign off for now.
So Lauren, if you want to put your hand down for the time being, we'll let Patty ask the question, and we'll probably come back to you. That's all right.
Sure, that's what I mean. Yep.
Absolutely. Thanks. Councillor Durkee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the information. So my question refers to well, you know that we had an issue with an organization wanting to do some salmon farming, and I know it's on land, but they wanted to let their open flow system where the water would go back into the ocean. And then we have areas not far from Yarmouth where there is open pen. So with these marine protected areas, would that stop anything from flowing into the ocean in those specific areas?
Maybe I'll start this one, but Glenn, I might get Glenn to jump in and provide his perspective on this one. But I mean, marine protected areas are, you know, they can do certain things, and they're not effective at doing certain things, and you know, they can't really do much to protect upstream activities, things that are outside the boundary that would flow kind of into the MPA. Although, you know, I think if there were to be a new development and there were to be like an environmental assessment process, if there's a marine protected area nearby, then you can be certain that any activity that would have an impact on that MPA would, probably be under more scrutiny than if it wasn't protected. So, a protected area is basically acknowledging and declaring that this is a special area that deserves special protection. So, Glenn, I don't know, I'm not doing this justice. Would you mind jumping in?
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, you made the main point that the protected area is restricted, its boundaries are restricted by legislation, and it can do certain things well. And then it is reliant on management in other jurisdictions and other sectors. And so a successful coastal, like in the offshore, there's a bit more autonomy, and a marine protected area is less likely to be impacted by activities from the outside, although we've heard this around oil and gas, around the Gully, which is a longstanding MPA, and then the concerns about oil and gas in the vicinity of an MPA and potential for accidents or noise, and what does that mean for within the MPA? And of course, the controls that are within the boundary are within the boundary. So effective MPA planning is reliant on effective management of the activities in and around it, or that potentially affecting it. And so in the coastal area, the health of the watershed associated with a coastal protected area is integral to it. And so this is where you get the partnerships. This is where the province comes in more. This is where municipalities can come in, and other stakeholders, not just the ones that we traditionally work with in the fishing industry and whatnot. So if you're looking at a site like this, part of the assessment would be, what are those issues that are upstream from the protected area? What are the management measures in place? What are the gaps? Because to have a successful protected area in an area like this will be contingent on effective management around it. So I can't answer specifically those ones. And now to the aquaculture, we don't have examples of aquaculture in existing protected areas, but that's only in this region. But that's largely because where we have done protection to date, they have not been aquaculture areas. There has been discussion about aquaculture in Eastern Shore Islands context, where shellfish aquaculture does have a history there, and there was a sense that it could be compatible, either within or definitely adjacent to, because most of that is up in the sort of inlets, so it would be outside the MPA there if we were to put one in. Shellfish aquaculture is looked at a bit differently than finfish aquaculture, which has a different set of inputs, potential implications for the marine environment. So it would have to be looked at very carefully. There's no out and out prohibition on any form of aquaculture in a marine protected area. But when you look at the national protection standards and the rules around dumping, you'd have to look carefully at what kind of aquaculture activities we're talking about and whether they would be compatible. The other thing that's really important here is an MPA, and I'm just looking at the site in front of me, they never look like the original study area, first of all. So if something came forward here, it probably would never look like what you see there. There would be a fairly extensive, and you guys are planners, so you know this, extensive process, and it would change and more information would come. And also they're often zoned, there's multiple types of zones, which can be more permissive and or more restrictive. So there's options and flexibility in how you design a site with to address some of these things as well. But again, it is it's not, from coastal MPA planning perspective, it is probably one of the biggest challenges is DFO, under our authorities, we are limited in what we can and can't do in marine conservation in this area. And we would be reliant on other partners, and also work within ourselves. As Dwayne alluded to, we have to work closely with our habitat group to address things like fish passage. So I'll stop there. Maybe Dwayne wants to jump in. I think he's got his hand up.
Yeah, just very quickly, I just wanted to add the area office. We did our small part. We do a part in the aquaculture and the site that was there, the salmon one that was proposed. And what we were asked to do was to list all the species and all the fishing that happened nearby that affluent where the wastewater would be going in. And had this MPA have been there, it wasn't in this. When I look at the map, it would have been a few miles from this. But we would have definitely mentioned that, we have, I think it was a 5-kilometer range that they told us to find out what fish was there. We would have definitely mentioned there's an MPA protected area within 2 kilometers of that site, which, as Marty alluded to, would have caused more scrutiny.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you,
I think,
everybody.
sorry,
Oh.
Trevor, if I may continue, just, I think
Yes.
that the concern is that, you know, we do all our homework and we try to find out as much as we can in terms of making sure that everything is safe. But we're depending on you folks to say yay or nay in these situations. And it still sounds as if it's a little bit wishy-washy to this extent, right? So, you know, if it comes to, you know, the municipalities, we're not the ones that have the authority over this. It's obviously the federal government and the provincial government, and yet, I don't know, there's still no strong stance on it one way or the other. That would be my concern.
I think like one thing we just need to keep in mind is that, you know, this MPAs are one tool. They can do certain things. They don't do other things very well. And, you know, fish move and water moves. So things are going to come in and out of the boundaries of a marine protected area. All we can really do is restrict and protect, restrict activities within the boundary and protect species or habitats that occur within the boundary when they're in the boundary. Now, but we don't, you know, MPAs they're not a silver bullet. They're not going to solve all of our problems, and it really requires, you know, I guess a mosaic of tools, you know. So our fish habitat group, you know, has certain tools that they can use under the Fisheries Act to protect, you know, to address some of the issues, hopefully, that Lauren, you know, is raising. You know, there's other rules, I guess, that would kind of get at your point there, Patty. So, you know, it's really, it's one tool in the toolbox. It's a good one. But it does have limitations. It's not a silver bullet for all of our problems.
So thank you for the answer. And as chair, you know, I'm noticing it's 8 o'clock, and certainly your team's been wonderful to come out and speak with us tonight. But what I'll propose for additional questions is perhaps that they be routed, if you'd be willing to answer some additional questions through our CAO to you, if you're accepting of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so we'll leave it there. And again, thank you everybody on the call and tonight, and certainly thanks to all the folks from BIO and the local DFO office for you know a great presentation and informative answers. Again, I do understand, we all understand the legislation is complex, and I think you've done a great job of illustrating how the MPAs and these other measures can protect the environment while allowing you know our lobster fishery to continue. And certainly you've identified the boundaries of the protected area being, you know, up into including the littoral zones, and but not sort of land-based any land-based area. So again, thank you so much, and I'll call for an adjournment of the meeting.
Thanks,
Over.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Bye-bye.